100-year anniversary of the academic achievement gap built and continuously renovated by the 100-year-old standardized testing movement. It is a centennial that hardly anyone knows about. These days, many people are criticizing the testing movement. Colleges are slowly diminishing the importance of standardized testing in admissions decisions. We are seeing unprecedented numbers of wealthy white parents opting their school children out of these tests. But few testing critics are bursting its biggest bubble, the existence of the achievement gap itself. To believe in the existence of any sort of racial hierarchy is to actually believe in a racist idea. The achievement gap between the races, with whites and Asians at the top and blacks and Latinos at the bottom, is a racial hierarchy. And this popular racial hierarchy has been constructed by our religious faith in standardized testing. Americans have been led to believe that intelligence is like body weight, and the different intellectual levels of different people can be measured on a single standardized weight scale. Our faith in standardized tests causes us to believe that the racial gap in test scores means something is wrong with the black test takers and not the tests. And the belief that inferior black minds are capable of doing as well as the superior white minds does not take away from the racist belief in the existence of the racial hierarchy itself. Let me explain. In 1869, Charles Darwin's cousin, English statistician Francois Galton, hypothesized in Hereditary Genius that the average intellectual standard of the Negro race is some 2 grades below our own. Galton pioneered the Western eugenics movement, but failed to develop a testing mechanism that verified his racist hypothesis. Where Galton failed, Francis, Alfred Binet, Theodore Simon thought they succeeded in 1905 when they developed an IQ test that Stanford University psychologist Louis Terman revised for Americans in 1916. An avowed eugenicist, Terman introduced and defended the viability of the nation's first popular standardized intelligence test in his 1916 book, The Measurement of Intelligence. These experimental tests will show enormously significant racial differences in general intelligence, differences which cannot be wiped out by any scheme of mental culture, Terman maintained. He imagined a permanent academic achievement gap, a permanent racial hierarchy. Terman's IQ test was the first administered on a major scale to 1.7 million US soldiers during World War I. Princeton University psychologist Carl C. Brigham presented the test results as evidence of genetic racial hierarchy in A Story of American Intelligence, published 3 years before he created the SAT test in 1926. Famed physicist William Shockley and educational psychologist Arthur Jensen carried these eugenic ideas into the 1960s. But by then, these genetic explanations, not the test and the achievement gap itself, had largely been discredited. In other words, the construction of a permanent racial hierarchy had been replaced by the construction of a temporary racial hierarchy. Well-meaning environmentalists had shifted the discourse to disclosing and closing the achievement gap, a shift that powered the testing movement through the bell curve controversy in 1994. It seems highly likely to us that both genes and the environment have something to do with racial differences in test scores, wrote Harvard experimental psychologist Richard Herrnstein and political scientist Charles Murray. The bell curve sparked such an intense academic war in 1995 that the American Psychological Association convened a task force on intelligence. The APA report rejected all the existing explanations for the differential between the mean intelligence test scores of blacks and whites, from biases in test construction to genes, class, and culture. At this time, no one knows what is responsible for the differential, they concluded. No one will ever know what doesn't exist, and yet the racist idea of an achievement gap lived on into the new millennium. The testing movement rejoiced over the bipartisan No Child Left Behind Act. Progress has been slow in closing the statistical gap. In 1964, a Department of Education report found that the average black 12th grader scored in the 13th percentile, meaning 87% of white 12th graders scored higher on their tests than the average black 12th grader. The nation's report card 50 years later found that the average black 12th grader scored in the 19th percentile. And in 2015, blacks still had the lowest mean SAT scores of any racial group. At 100 years young, standardized tests have come to literally embody the American doors of opportunity, admitting and barring people from the highest ranked schools, colleges, graduate schools, professions, and jobs. Standardized tests have become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade black minds and illegally exclude their bodies. However, some of the greatest offenders of standardized testing are civil rights leaders who rely on testing data in their well-meaning lobbying efforts for greater accountability and resources. But what if, all along, our well-meaning efforts at closing the achievement gap has been opening the door to racist ideas? What if different environments actually cause different kinds of achievement rather than different levels of achievement? What if the intellect of a poor, low-testing black child in a poor black school is different and not inferior to the intellect of a rich, high-testing white child in a rich white school? What if the way we measure intelligence shows not only our racism, but our elitism? Gathering knowledge of abstract items, from words to equations, that have no relation to our everyday lives has long been the amusement of the leisured elite. Relegating the non-elite to the basement of intellect because they do not know as many abstractions has been the conceit of the elite. What if we measured literacy by how knowledgeable individuals are about their own environment? How much individuals knew all those complex equations and verbal and nonverbal vocabularies of their everyday lives? What if we measured intellect by an individual's desire to know? What if we measured intellect by how open an individual's mind is to self-critique and new ideas? What if our educational system focused on opening minds instead of filling minds and testing how full they are? What if we realized the best way to standardize a highly effective educational system is not by standardizing our tests, but by standardizing our schools to encourage intellectual openness and difference? But intellectual difference and multiple literacies, language, and vocabularies are only valued in a multicultural society that truly values diversity and difference. The testing movement does not value multiculturalism. The testing movement does not value the anti-racist equality of difference. The testing movement values the racist hierarchy of difference and its bastard 100-year-old child, the academic achievement gap. That's Ibram X. Kendi's words from the 2016 article, Why the Academic Achievement Gap is a Racist Idea.
Come on.
I start with that because I realize that we are here to honor schools who have improved testing scores. And in my district, when I go to a professional development about this topic, they say, where do you find that in the data? And that question is mostly directed towards people who try to challenge standardized testing. And so I'm going to show you where I find that in the data. This top bar, and this is all data I did after I got the list of the schools that are being recognized across the state, not just in the PSESD. So you can see the top bar shows the overall state demographics by race. So the light blue bar is white, the one in the middle is Latinx, and the bottom one is black.
Sorry,
But as,
percent meeting standard or something like that?
no, that's just racial demographics
Just
of
counts
students
of
in the state. Yep. So if we look at the schools that have been selected, these are schools that have predominantly that race in their school. So in elementary school, predominantly white schools were chosen. Same with middle school and high school. And I want to read this quote again. Standardized tests have become the most effective racist weapon ever devised to objectively degrade black minds and legally exclude their bodies. And this is shown in the data. The only place where we see a school that has predominantly black population is in high school, and that's Rainier Beach High School. Yeah. No other schools that have predominantly black populations have been selected, or it was less than 1%, so it doesn't show up on the graph. So what I did is I went through all the schools and I found out which schools have majority student of color populations. Because in those schools, we should see that those students of color have improved or are doing really great. I'm only going to focus on elementary schools because that had the most complete data, because lots of kids opt out at high school, thank goodness. And so here are schools that are majority Latinx schools. They're ELA and math SBA scores. Chester H. Thompson Elementary School. This is the only school being recognized tonight across the state where the students of color are performing at or better than their white and Asian peers in SBA tests. The only one, and that's for any racial minority, any like Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander, Native American, is the only one. So that caught my interest, of course. So I went on Google, Googled up Chester H. Thompson Elementary, and I discovered that they have a dual language immersion program. So these kids are learning their culture and their language is being valued in their school. That's why they're doing better. This is Edison Elementary. I have a bunch of slides. Garfield Elementary. Lyon Elementary. Now remember, these are schools where the Latinx kids are the majority. This one looks promising until you look at the measurement. That top bar is only 50%. So they're still, even though at this school the Latinx kids are doing better than the white kids, they're still underperforming as compared to their white and Asian counterparts across the state. Millennium Elementary. Shorewood Elementary. This is in my neighborhood. I taught in Seattle. I work in Seattle, but I live in the Highline School District. This is Highline School District. Zilla Intermediate. Then I went and found the two majority black schools, elementary schools, and they're from my district, Seattle Public Schools. Hoffman Elementary, majority black students. Sorry, y'all, but less shy. I couldn't include the math scores because for some reason on OSPI, the math data wasn't available. So I just did ELA. 30% for black kids. So I focused on black and Latinx kids because once you get on the OSPF website and try to look at by the schools, some schools don't have black or Latinx kids, and some schools only literally have one or two. And so the test results aren't displayed for fear of being able to identify those kids. So I looked up the state scores. Latinx kids are scoring in about the 40% range statewide for math, and about 30% for ELA. Black kids, about 30% for both math and ELA. American Pacific Islander kids, about 30% for math and ELA. And Native American kids, about 30% for math and about 20% for ELA. So these are, again, the demographics of the state for each ethnic and racial category on your guys' left. And on the right is the demographics for our region. And I wanted to put this up here to show that in our region, we have the most diverse region in the state. And so this is an imperative statewide, but this data shows it's even more of an imperative for us in PSESD. I know this is a celebration, and I thought long and hard about what I was going to talk about when I came here. But my responsibility is to these people, the babies. And when we're failing them, we can't live. As a Mexican American woman, when I hear standardization, I hear assimilation. Standardized testing upholds whiteness as the ideal. We are forcing our kids of color into white holes that they don't fit in, that they go shoved into, pushing and screaming, That's why discipline rates are off the charts for kids of color also, because they're not valued in their classroom. The beauty of the world lies in the diversity of its people. And that doesn't just apply to skin color, or religion, or gender. That applies to ways of knowing and learning and being in the world. Standardized testing doesn't allow for that. And until we stop this toxic testing, our kids of color will never succeed